Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to each of you. Thank you for being here. Let me say, first of all, Chairman Pai, I wanted to thank you for your leadership, in particular in stepping forward with the Commission and repealing the Obama FCC's net neutrality rules. That has been a topic of much discussion, including enormous hyperbole. Indeed, we heard that the world was going to end when the net neutrality rules were repealed, notwithstanding the fact that they had been implemented only in 2015, so for the entire history of the Internet, the FCC had not declared the authority to regulate prices and terms of service on the Internet, other than for the 2 years of that unlawful power grab. Nonetheless, with an abundance of misinformation, many people of good conscience were told that somehow eliminating regulation of the Internet by the federal government would imperil their freedom. So let me ask you, now that those rules have been repealed, has the Internet ceased to function?
It is not, Senator.
And the parade of horribles that people were told, have those parade of horribles, is there any evidence that any of them have come to pass?
They have not, and moreover, even if one or two or many were, we now have in place an FCC transparency rule and FTC enforcement to make sure that it would be addressed quickly.
Well, I want to commend you for having the courage to do that, because there was a lot of political animus, nastiness, and misinformation. Much of that was directed at you personally and your family. And I want to say thank you publicly for serving and enduring that kind of grief. I believe that our family should be off limits, and for anyone to be targeting particularly kids is inappropriate. So thank you for your service, and I appreciate, I'm a big believer in keeping the Internet free, and keeping it free from taxation, keeping it free from regulation, allowing it to be an oasis of free speech and entrepreneurial freedom. And I believe the decision that the FCC made to end that power grab by Washington was the right decision and was consistent with law. Let's shift to a different topic, which is 5G. Earlier this month, Deloitte released a report entitled 5G, the Chance to Lead for a Decade. The report highlights that, quote, since 2015, China has outspent the U.S. by approximately $24 billion in wireless communication infrastructure, and has built 350,000 new sites, while the U.S. has built fewer than 30,000. Looking forward, China's 5-year economic plan specifies $400 billion in 5G-related investment. Consequently, China and other countries may be creating a 5G tsunami, making it near impossible to catch up. So that was Deloitte's conclusion. Do you share that assessment, that it may be near impossible to catch up with China on 5G?
Appreciate the question, Senator. I believe the U.S. is leading on 5G with respect to spectrum. We're holding major auctions at the end of this year and then the second half of next year. With respect to infrastructure over short-sighted opposition, we've been modernizing our rules to make sure that any small cell deployment doesn't have to jump through federal, state, local, and in some cases tribal hoops. That is an effort that is absolutely necessary. You will never get 5G infrastructure at scale if you have these multiple levels of regulatory review, which China, for obvious reasons, doesn't observe. So I think it's critical for us to modernize our rules to assert U.S. leadership in 5G.
So what are the barriers, regulatory or otherwise, that have been standing in the way of deployment of 5G infrastructure?
Senator, I think that by far the biggest one has been our infrastructure policies. These policies were developed for another age, another kind of infrastructure. They were designed for big cell towers, not multiplicity of small cells. In addition, as I said, we've had a history in this country for a variety of reasons for multiple levels of regulatory review. The most powerful thing this Congress could do, frankly, with respect to the internet is to adhere to the 5-word phrase that Chairman Thune used in his opening remarks, the borderless nature of internet access. The FCC has long found that the internet is inherently an interstate service. It follows from that, then, that the FCC should be able to establish a consistent, uniform system of regulation. So long as we have multiple bites of the regulatory apple and the regulatory uncertainty that flows from that, we will always be behind those countries that have established a national policy on 5G.
Okay, and so last question. As you're aware, a report came out from the National Security Council suggesting the possibility of nationalizing 5G. And indeed, there have been others who have expressed possible support for that. Personally, I think that's a terrible idea. And as you know, I've introduced legislation, bipartisan legislation with Senator Cortez Masto to make clear that the federal government cannot nationalize 5G absent explicit congressional authorization. The question I wanted to ask Chairman Pai, but actually to each of the 4 of you, do any of you disagree that nationalizing 5G would be a mistake?
I do not, Senator. I've consistently said that I believe the market, not government, is best positioned to drive innovation and investment in this area.
No, I support your legislation.
Thank you.
Nationalizing networks is not the path forward. We won the race to 4G based on the free market, and that's the path to 5G as well.
I agree with my colleagues on this.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.